All right, guys. I'd like to talk now about the arm drag. Arm drag and things like that, like 2-on-1s, like Russian ties, stuff like that, are things that sometimes you'll hear people like, oh, you can't do that in fighting. You definitely can. It's just you can't do things quite the same way. Sometimes you don't have time to sit around in front of someone when they could otherwise be swinging at you. So what you're going to have to do is be able to manage with motion and fluidity, things that you could sometimes get away with doing with like just horsepower. So when I'm in my shell, when I'm arm dragging, all I'm doing is trying to get the guardian to Adam's back out the way. Because if I try to go to your back, I'm like, he's just not having it. I just run into his arm. I'm like, let me go to your back this way. And I'm like, damn it. Well, if you had one arm, like you put that in your strong hand, and I'm like, it's not super cool. You know, it's like if I was a one-arm boxer and you just kept punching me in the side of the head that I can't protect. It's not very nice, but it would be effective. So what we're looking to do here with our drag is just keep that thing out the way and then move our body through space. Sometimes you can actually drag somebody, like with the sensitive thing, like, yeah, let me pull that thing on over to me. But again, keep in mind, you're sitting down on your butt here. You're not going to physically overpower a man or a person your size or larger that knows how to use their body, from the bottom. It's just not a reasonable thing to expect. So rather than trying to physically horse them through space, I'm going to kind of guide them as I move myself. So here we are on our shell. I'm like, if that hand slinks to the inside, I'm moving. Now, it looks like I pulled at him, but I didn't. Watch his base. Goes to the inside. I'm like, whoa. I'll move myself, check his hand, sit up and move by it. He barely moved. Let's turn sideways so you guys can see. And of course, like if I could give him a little pull, that's fine too, but don't sit here and try to do one of them. It seems like it works, and against people that suck, it works. It'll seem disproportionately effective. Against people that actually know how to counter the arm drag, that it's not going to serve you very well. So he moves. I simply get his hand into the line that I want. I want to make sure that it's not on the outside of my body. I have to get to the center or in. I sit up and I move by him. If I can build up over top of him, I make it difficult for him to whiz at me. If I hunker down, I'm vulnerable to the guillotine. If I stay here, I'm vulnerable to the whizzer. Even if I get behind him, if I'm low, I'm vulnerable to all sorts of things. So what I want to do is get myself up as reasonably high as possible towards where I would try to seatbelt him. Don't jump. Don't rely on your arms. A lot of times what people tend to do is they stay put and they try to grab. Get yourself up here. So in the past, if we rotate back the other way, please. I guess what I would have said with the drag is that there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Like I'll sit here, because the difference between fighting and real martial arts grappling and grappling is that I can camp out here. And not just camp out here, like be on bottom, because as you guys can see, I'll be on bottom in my fights for periods of time. But I don't get the luxury of like sitting right here and going, all right, let me fiddle with this thing until I kind of get it to where I want, and then get the grip that I want, and then try to move, dude, because it's too easy for him to either A, leave, or B, harm me. So I have to be able to move this way, that way, this way, that way. So the way that you create, protection, safety, and offense, it just is fundamentally different. I don't get to do this type of stuff and try to like surprise him. Because what would you do here? Nice. What else could you do? God, you were a gentleman. I'll break your face even from the bottom. What else could you do? Ow. So obviously Adam's a great grappler and he can respond with grappling responses, but this actually makes my point for me. And I'll use you as an example of something that, because again, you have someone who's a great grappler who's involved in grappling at a high level. So he goes, what's first on the brain? And the reason I point at this, because I know what it's like, man. I've been there. What's first on the brain is like, oh yeah, he's doing proper grappling responses that are correct. But what's first on the brain in a martial arts context? I'm like, well, what would you do if you were in a fight? And I'm like, well, I guess I would put my hands up and do this and that. I'm like, what? Somebody else is like, well, why don't you just stab him? I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. What's easier, fighting someone or assassinating them with a knife? I mean, it's not, you'll probably go to jail. I mean, you should probably run away. But the answer is, it is a much simpler response, and something that you got to be ready for is that we are all conditioned, guys, as jiu-jitsu people to respond in certain ways. And also our partners are conditioned to respond in certain ways. You've been indoctrinated whether you realize it or not. You came up in certain rule sets and you came up in certain value sets. That's why when you wrestle someone that wrestled or did Sambo or did that, they came up in a different one. And they have similar values and similar responses in certain regards, and they have others in others. And then every now and then it's like, it doesn't cross my mind to bite people in training, but we've all trained with the white belt that is like literally feral, you know, and you're like, good God. And they don't, it's not like he's thinking about an armbar. He doesn't know what a fucking armbar is. He doesn't know what his teeth are though. And that's why like you'll have like claw marks on you sometimes. So I guess my point is the simplest answer there is just to pop me in the nose with your hand. And if you do that once or twice, there's a very good chance I'll let go. And if I don't, I probably should have, because every now and then it's like no different than, could you heal it real quick? Every now and then you'll see stuff like this where people are just getting wailed on. And then after 5 of those, I'm like, and I tap. But then other times he's just getting wailed on and he's trying to finish the heel hook and then eventually he gets knocked out. And I'm like, oh, my knee hurts. Fuck, I didn't even notice that. So you absolutely have to take your safety from these weapons very seriously. And then that ability and that if you can handle that, the mental pace of decision making in a context where you're not able to camp out, and then someone I'm 10 times better of a grappler gi or even no gi or even gi, oddly enough, than I even don't train the gi anymore. Than I was when I was competing, which is kind of bizarre, and I wish I could go back if I didn't have better things to do. But the idea is it's just so much more of a relaxed pace that it's just a simpler problem to solve, a different type of problem to solve, and a challenging problem to solve. And people do different things, and people are more adept in certain areas in grappling. But just the pace of the questions comes so much more slowly, so it's so much more manageable. I don't have to adjust as much, and that's just something to consider. So if you can build up that capacity, you won't be sad that you did. So if we come back to the arm drag again, if I'm in my shell, I can easily adjust, move back, and drag. But again, sitting here for extended periods of time in the open game that allows me to adjust his arms across with this type of space. If I have the type of space to do all of this, he has the type of space to do what?
Hit you, underhook.
Yeah, just you get underhook. Seriously, oops. A lot of oops, headbutts, and fights. Seriously, like oops. I'm like, oh, my bad. And then crack. And then people forget about the headbutt 2 days later. So they show it in the replay, you know, and then the right hand comes. And it's like, oh, man, but 3 weeks later on Sherdog or whatever, it just says got KO'd by a right hand. You know, people who were there, we know what happened. But anyway, so watch, you start trying to hand fight through my guard. Wow, I'm going to start to hit you. Like, it's like serious. Versus, okay, now can I hit you? No, we're deeply engaged in a way that a lot of times people try to not be in grappling, but that will actually protect you. So the point is, rather than sitting here for extended periods of time and working to my arm drag, which is absolutely not wrong. It's just, if you want to learn how to do that, you probably know how to do it already. And if you don't, there's other resources for that. I'd rather talk to you guys about kind of how it works in a more real context. I'll block and move. And if you move your hand inside of my ground, I'm like, whoa. And I will actually guide myself through. Now, why wouldn't this happen in one of my fights? Because I'm not fighting Adam, and I'm not fighting, generally speaking, another super experienced jiu-jitsu guy, so they won't engage in that type of fight. But if I were somehow in an MMA fight with Adam, he might come close to me like that because he believes deeply in his jiu-jitsu as well. He should. So he's like, yeah, man, I'll engage you there. I'll try to underhook you. I'll see if I can hand fight with you. And that's where an arm drag might be more likely to happen. Like, you'll see cooler wrestling stuff, wrestler versus wrestler. You'll see cooler jiu-jitsu stuff, sometimes jiu-jitsu guy versus jiu-jitsu guy, because both people are willing to get a little bit deeper into the game that the other guy is strong in.